Morning. It's good to be here with you this morning. It's been a little bit since I've had the opportunity to speak to you. Got excited because the time after I spoke, Troy got up here and wore sweatpants. I thought that was going to become the norm and acceptable, but then he badmouthed it last week, so I refrained and wore usual attire. But it's good to be with you. It's good to have an opportunity to speak before you. One of my favorite traditions that we have each year, or at least for the past, maybe 5 to 10 years, is going to my Aunt Kathy's on Super Bowl Sunday and talking some trash to those who are cheering for a different team, to play some games. But like so many things over the past 11 months, that's something we'll just have to put on hold for a year. And that certainly disappoints me, and I hope all of you are able to be safe and enjoy this Super Bowl Sunday with your family. So one thing I want to talk about this morning, and it's something that we've heard over the last year, but it's not COVID related, is the phrase, and this is going to introduce us into what we're going to be talking about this morning, is the phrase bad apples. We've heard, if you've ever watched the news in the past year, you might have heard about a few bad apples, just a bad apple, something along those lines. And oftentimes it's separated from the full phrase, which commonly is bad apples spoil the bunch. That a few bad apples can ruin a whole group. And the point being that groups can be ruined, soiled, tarnished by a few. And I think as Christians, we know this, we understand this, we've seen this in practice, whether it be when we're talking to somebody and they say, well, Christians are hypocrites, or, Christians are the worst people of them all, because they've had somebody, whether that be a friend, a coworker, a family member, who had done them wrong, and they associate the entire group with that experience. And that's one of the reasons that I'm really, really excited for this year's theme. This year's theme, as you can see to the side, and if you can't pan over, that's fine, but it's being like Christ. And that's what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of different facets to that. There's a lot of different ways that we could go. If a class on the life of Christ can last 3 years, a topic like being like Christ could probably last us decades, if not generations and lifetimes. But we want to be called Christians. It's one thing I've heard since I was young. We want to be called Christians. We're not Lutherans. We're not Baptists. We're not Catholics. We're not Hindus or Buddhists or whoever. We want to be called Christians. That's the title we want to adopt and be called. And by saying that, we need to understand that we are representing Christ in that. That's the name right there. We are Christians. And by that, he's to represent us. And we understand that labels and titles mean something. I remember going through school, and they'd be going through the roll on the first day. Daniel Hudson, are you any relation to Dave Hudson? And I would go, yes, he's my brother. And because of that, they'd have certain thoughts initially about me. Some good, some bad, depending on the teacher probably. And Paul had the same thing. Are you any relation to Daniel? That was all good though, when the teacher asked that. But that's, we carry the label. The label means something. The title means something. And I'm not saying we consciously think this, but sometimes I feel like we act like we can take off and on the label of Christ. There are times where, this may not be what Christ wanted, but it's something that we need to do. We're not a Christian when we do this, but, that's not really something that he's concerned with. But being like Christ and being connected to Christ is a theme that we're going to talk about, and it's right there in our scripture reading in John chapter 15. We're going to be moving around a lot, but we're going to be spending most of our time in John chapter 15. And in John chapter 15, in verse 5, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. See, Jesus uses the analogy of a vine and branches. See, branches must always remain connected to the vine. They must always, get their nourishment, get their food, get their life from the vine. Loose branches, broken branches, branches that are separated even temporarily, die and bear no fruit, as Jesus would use in this example. But Jesus says that connected branches bear fruit. He who abides in me, he bears much fruit. And this concept, this teaching of bearing fruit is common with Jesus' teachings. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 and 17, Jesus says, "You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, and the bad tree bears bad fruit. You will know them by their fruits." In the parable of the sower, when Jesus is explaining the meaning of the parable of the sower in Matthew chapter 13, verse 23, he says, "But the one who is sown with seed on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces, some 100, some 60, and some 30 times as much." Those who fall on the good seed, the seed that we want to be, the seed that falls on good soil, this is the one that bears fruit and produces. And to bear fruit is simply to have a manifest of actions, to have a byproduct. Think about it with bearing results, bearing the desired outcome. That's what it means to bear fruit. And Jesus says in verse 2 of John chapter 15, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it might bear more fruit." Jesus says those that don't bear fruit are removed. Those that don't have this desired outcome, don't have this byproduct, are removed. But he also takes care of us. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it might bear more fruit. The message here is clear that followers of Christ should reflect Jesus. The vine determines our fruit. As Jesus said in Matthew 7, "Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles." If Jesus is our vine, if we are the branches of that vine, our fruit produced is reflective of Jesus. And this is a continuation of the message that Jesus is giving in John. I know Dave talked about John a couple weeks ago. And this message of following the example of Christ, of being like Christ, this is in chapter 15 a continuation of what he's already said. If you skip back to chapter 12, in verse 26, he says, "If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. If anyone serves me, he's to follow me. If anyone, where I am, there they are to be." They're not to be separated. They are to be where I am. They are to follow me closely. And then forward in chapter 13, verses 12 through 15, he said, "Then when he had washed their feet and had taken their garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, 'Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are correct, for so I am. So if I, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I give you an example so that you would also do just as I did for you.'" If I am your Lord, if I am your teacher, you are to do what I do. I am to be your example, and you ought to do as I did for you, you're to do for others. Jesus tells us he is our example. He is our vine that nourishes us. He is our head. And as we study deeper into being like Christ, as we dive into this huge and immense task of being like Christ, it may get uncomfortable. Being like Christ can be difficult. It's a cross to bear, and we're told we won't be perfect in that. But are we ready to look, and this is the question that I want to start off as we're kicking off this theme this morning, are we ready to look at our lives critically? It's difficult to admit things need to change sometimes. It's difficult to admit things need to change when being right is so emphasized and important. That's why it's so vital that as we go this year, we keep our focus on Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 12, and verse 1 was read this morning in class, but I want to read verses 1 and 2. "Therefore, since we also have a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, Let's rid ourselves of every obstacle and the sin which so easily entangles us. And let's run with endurance to the race that is set before us. And then verse 2, looking only to Jesus, the originator and perfecter of the faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So as we're setting out on this journey, it's important we fix our eyes on Jesus and Jesus only. We can't let traditions, customs, preferences, sin deflect our gaze. My hope this year is that we'll all be introspective, that we'll all examine ourselves as we study how we are to be like Jesus. And I want us to think about how Jesus would be in all of our lives scenarios. Like the bracelet says, what would Jesus do? That's not a one time a day proposition. That's not a some days proposition. How would Jesus handle those difficult matters in our lives? How would Jesus speak about the difficult scenarios in our society? How would Jesus handle matters of race, of gender, of politics? How would Jesus deal with these situations? What would Jesus say? What would Jesus do? And I pray that we allow God to be the vine dresser for us, and we stay firmly connected to the vine. Because I think that's the key. Because there's a question that, maybe none of you have ever asked this before. Maybe this is just my own insecurity. I'll speak very personally for a second. Maybe this is my own insecurity, but I always think, why should somebody listen to me? Many of you have known me for my entire life, for most of my life. You've known me since I was knee-high to a cornflake, to borrow an expression from Coach Ellis. So why should you listen to what I have to say? And my answer to that is the same reason you should listen to Troy and Dave and Dad and Sean. Filter whatever we say through Jesus. Filter what we say through God's word. Filter what we say through the prism, and this is what Dave talked about a couple weeks ago, through the prism of seeing things like Jesus. And then let Jesus work on us. Let the vine dresser do his work. In Isaiah 64, Isaiah writes, "You are the potter, we are the clay. Allow God to mold us." It's a question I've been thinking about this whole week as I was trying to prepare this sermon is, have we changed our mind on anything spiritually in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? And if we haven't, there's two different scenarios there. Either we've had it all right, which I want to say is misguided, or we haven't allowed the vine dresser to work on us. We haven't allowed God to do his work in us. We haven't allowed Jesus to work in our lives to change us, because improvement requires change. You can't improve without changing. If you want to run a 5K or a marathon or an Ironman, and all you ever do is get on the treadmill and walk for 5 minutes, you're not going to be ready. You need to change. You need to improve. You need to continue to bump that up, bump that up, bump that up. Continue to get better. And I don't know if we talk about that enough. I don't know if I think like that enough. That improvement requires change. You can't stay the same and improve. Just not physically possible. And if there's ever a theme, if there's ever a subject, if there's ever a talk that should change us, it's the subject of being like Christ. Because that's a radical, tough, important subject for us to focus on and do. So that's my hope this year. That's my introduction to this theme, because there's going to be a lot of different things we talk about. There's going to be a lot of different subjects we cover. This is a big thing. But we need to focus on and continually fix our eyes on Christ, the perfecter of our faith, and let the vine dresser work on us. If there's anything that we can do for you this morning, if you have any questions, any needs, we want to be here for you, whether you are here physically or joining us via the live stream. We encourage you to reach out. We are a family that should be working together to become more like Christ together. And we want to be there for you. If you have any issues or questions, please come forward or contact us as we stand and sing.